I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on today's webinar, which is Steps to Adopting a Problem-Solving Approach. Today in the studio, I have Melantha Witherspoon with me. I will let her tell you a little more about herself in just a moment. Before I turn it over to her, I would like to go over a couple housekeeping items. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, if you'll drop those questions or concerns into the chat box, we'll address those to the best of our capability. If you have questions about content that's being presented, please put those questions in the Q&A box. Melantha will be addressing those questions at the end of the webinar as time allows. We'll also make sure that we put together an FAQ to address those questions, and we'll put that out with the recording of this webinar. For those of you participating live today, we did do something a little different if you're familiar with how we typically roll out our webinars. There are several different handouts with today's webinar, so I did make sure that I pushed those out to you in an email about a half hour ago, just to make sure that you have those. If you want to take notes, if you want to reference those, we'll still be pulling them up on the screen, but you also have those to take notes on. So with that said, I will turn it over to Melantha.
Greetings, everyone. I am so excited to discuss steps to adapting a problem-solving approach. I want you guys all to walk away with understanding when it's time to have a problem-solving meeting, the benefits of that meeting, as well as the elements that need to be reviewed and discussed during the problem-solving meeting, and how critical follow-up is. So you want to know what a problem-solving meeting is? I'm excited to tell you. It's a meeting that consists of team members, family, advocates, friends, who all have the common goal of resolving an issue by refining the current strategies or developing new strategies. This meeting should result in new strategies that address an unmet need while preventing the problem from worsening or becoming chronic. When is a problem-solving meeting necessary? I'm glad you asked. It's a good time to have a problem-solving meeting if a person is struggling with transition. Some examples of that are if a person is accustomed to their parents visiting them and taking them out to eat on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and they reduce that time to Sunday. That person really can't see the benefit of the reduction of that outing, and they enjoy eating out a lot, and now they're only eating out with their preferred people once a week, and it's creating some kind of tension and problem. Another example of struggling with the transition is if a person is used to living in a metropolitan area where there are lots of evening activities for them to do, and they move to a rural area and everything kind of closes down at 9 or 8 o'clock. They can't see the benefit of that, so that may create an issue. If you have a person that is struggling to re-engage in meaningful activities, that is an issue that needs some solution. If a person can't communicate their wants and needs, or they struggle to understand boundaries, some of you may support people who go out into the community. They don't do a good job of reading people's body language, and they want to hug everybody. That's an issue that needs solutions. After someone has been admitted to the hospital, I know oftentimes teams may think a med adjustment may address the problem. However, that's not always what needs to be addressed, so it's good to have the team come together and discuss what led to that person's hospital admission. If a person has had an incident involving aggression or self-interest behavior, property destruction or elopement, or ingesting non-edible items, this is also a time for the team to come together and to look at what can we do to keep this from reoccurring or worsening. After a staff member or someone at the school or a person's uh, place of employment, if they've had to call law enforcement for assistance, that's another red flag. If a person ends up suspended from school or work or day program, the team needs to come together. If a parent or housemate or anyone that is supporting a person, they voice that they don't feel comfortable or safe interacting with the person or being in the same space, something definitely needs to be addressed. And so, again, this is a good time to come together and find some solutions to address the problem. If a provider has voiced that they can no longer support the person, and at this point, we've waited a little too long to have a problem-solving meeting, but it is also an appropriate time to have a problem-solving meeting. There are probably at least 50 more things that could be added to this list. The bottom line is if there's a problem, the best resolution to that is to bring the team together and have a problem-solving meeting. It's also important that all vested parties attend this meeting. So the person that's experiencing the problem, their guardian, if there are direct care professionals involved, a representative from the school, a day program, or the person's place of employment, if they have a mental health professional involved, if they have case management from behavioral health, if there's a licensed behavioral provider involved, if they have any of the therapists that work with speech and language or occupational therapy or the community integration specialist, everyone needs to come to the table and give their perspective on what is going through and share their thoughts so that issues can get resolved. The whole purpose of this problem-solving meeting is to develop an action plan. And so all of these elements that are listed on this slide need to be addressed during that meeting. So the first part of the action plan is you want to identify what the problem is. And then you want to have some discussion around who the problem belongs to. And somebody may be wondering, what do you mean by that? Well, there may be a situation where there is a 25-year-old male who has now become very interested in dating, and his guardian does not think it is appropriate for him to date. And so that is creating some kind of conflict. Well, the problem really doesn't belong to the person who, the 25-year-old that you're supporting that wants to date. That problem really belongs to the guardian. And some of the concerns that the guardian can have can be addressed by that person getting some skill training on dating and relationships. And so we really need to identify when we're having the problem who the problem belongs to. Another example of that may be someone who makes an annoying sound, and the person that supports them just can't tolerate that sound. So that person may need to learn skills where they learn to block out that sound, or they may need to consider another environment. So that problem doesn't really belong to the person who makes the sound because it's not really causing that person any kind of issue or harm. The team during this process really needs to discuss if the problem is new, acute, or chronic. They need to review strategies that have been tried that were unsuccessful. Discuss the barriers that prevented those strategies from being successful. Have some conversation pertaining to if strategies need to be modified, or do we need to develop new strategies? And then a system needs to be developed where data is collected to determine if strategies are effective and to ensure that strategies are being implemented correctly, and that those the system allows for um, the team to understand when modifications to the strategies need to be made. And then the last step is to ensure that the team is meeting periodically to examine all of the elements of the action plan to review implementation of the strategies. Prior to having this meeting, there is some work that needs to happen. So the team should determine if this meeting is going to happen in person or if it's going to be a conference call, or if we're going to afford the team to have an option to meet in person or join by phone. And then you want to identify data that needs to be collected and shared at the meeting. And their ISL providers, guardians, often have a lot of good raw data. And so some examples of those are if a person has a bowel movement chart, if sleep data is being collected, if you have consults from their primary care physician or psychiatrist or neurologist, you want to bring those to the meetings. If they're in an ISL and there are individual observation notes, that really highlights what is happening during that person's day. So you want to have all of this stuff gathered together and prepared to share with all of the team members. And then to make the best use of time, it's also a good idea to have the team members to identify what they believe the problem is, and it's good to have this written down and brought to the meeting. The first step and the first thing that team members should discuss is this person experiencing a medical issue? So have some discussion around when was the last time the person saw their primary care physician. Is the primary care physician currently addressing any symptoms that may be related to the problem? If they are working with a neurologist or a hematologist and a psychiatrist, are those physicians aware that this person is having a problem? Can this person accurately communicate to their caregiver when they're experiencing medical symptoms? And I'll just go through a few more of these because one of the handouts actually has all of these questions on them. So if people want to do some pre-problem solving before they get to the meeting to kind of yes, no, check these, you have an actual sheet that lists all of these questions to consider. And slide 2 talks a little bit more about psychotropic medication and is the team aware of the side effects that come with those psychotropic medications? Or is there someone monitoring them to make sure the person isn't experiencing those symptoms? So, so again, I'm not going to go through all of these. There's a form that will guide you guys if you want to use it as a tool, and you're more than welcome to use it and modify it as you see needed. So if the team determines that this person is not having medical issues, then you want to determine is the problem related to a skill deficit, or if if the person's environment is in support of the person using those skills. And so this list too could have 50 more things added to it. However, these are some of the common things I've seen since I've been with the St. Louis Regional Office where these are some skills that people would benefit from having. So a person understanding, do they have the ability to develop healthy relationships? Are they able to read social cues? Can they negotiate when they want to do chores or their working hours if their employer is open to that? Are they able to budget their money? Can they accept when they can't access things? So if a person doesn't have these skills, these are all skills that are good to work on, and they typically lead to a person having a better quality of life and that person being able to advocate for their wants and needs. So if it's not a medical issue, it's not a skill deficit issue, then you want to look at the person's quality of life. So it's good to something that you can bring to the meeting when the team comes together is to bring that person's monthly schedule. You want to discuss if that person's routine is connected to preferred activities and people at least 60% of the time. I think based on reviewing lots of ISPs, the team, the service coordinator, you guys do an excellent job of identifying what is preferred by the person. I think the breakdown happens when it's time to connect those things to the person's daily schedule. Also, when you are considering a meaningful life for the person, it's going to be critical to consider who that person is. Some people are late risers, and so their schedule should start late. Think about it. There are lots of people who work a second shift and a third shift, and they enjoy it. And if the person is an early riser, allow them to have a schedule that, if need be, starts at 4 o'clock in the morning. And if the person loves people, make sure they have lots of opportunities to get out to the different fairs that are offered around the city. They're a part of lots of social groups because all of those things bring purpose and joy to people. I always like to share that typically people don't run from things that they love or meaningful life or whatever they deem their purpose is. They run from coercive environments that don't allow them to have very much choice. So if you've ruled out illness, skill deficit, a meaningful life, let's take a look at the person's environment. Is their environment enriched? Does the person feel safe in their home? Do their caregivers respect them? And some examples of that is, do they have the opportunity to say no to things? Or can they modify things? Does the person have an opportunity to eat more foods that are nutritious versus junk food? Are they moving their bodies at least 20 minutes a day with enjoyable activities? So everybody doesn't love going to the gym or a dance class, but there are some people who love to walk the mall. So a person can walk the mall 20 minutes and it won't feel like exercise. Or a person may love to skate. So just making sure that physical activity is tied to something that they prefer. And then also looking at, having some discussion around, does the person have opportunities to get exposed to exciting activities, places, or people? Do they have close-knit relationships with people outside of their caregivers? And then we want to examine the supports for the caregiver. Would the caregiver benefit from some mental health training so that they have a better understanding of schizophrenia or reactive detachment disorder? what they benefit from training from positive behavior supports. The state has several approved curriculums such as tools or gentle teaching. What they benefit from, these are all questions you can ask during your problem-solving meeting. Basic applied behavior analysis training so that when they're reinforcing behavior, they don't feel like they're bribing behavior. There's a difference. And then taking care of a person, whether it's taking care of their medical needs or behavioral needs, can be traumatic. So would they benefit from some training in the trauma-informed care system? And then when you think about families who, again, are supporting children or adults in a natural home setting, ensuring that they have appropriate time away from the responsibilities of caring for their loved ones. So would they benefit from respite or being around a common group of people who understand the challenges that come along with caring for someone? If they're struggling in the school setting, would they benefit from an educational advocate or shorter periods of caregiving? If you're working in an ISL setting and you are working with a person who may be displaying high rates of physical aggression, is it good for the team to discuss the direct care professionals having the option of working 4-hour shifts? And it's also important to consider guardians or parents who, again, are supporting people with complex medical or behavioral needs. Being a parent alone is a very taxing job, rewarding but taxing. And so I could not imagine supporting a child that had both medical and behavioral needs. And so when I think about that situation, I consider the fact that some parents might require more direct linking and linking of services. And what I mean by that is it may not be enough to just give a parent a list of speech and language pathologists. You may have to schedule a time to sit down with that parent and actually call that provider and have a list of questions ready for that provider so that you're providing a little bit more direct support to that overwhelmed mother and father. So consider that as well. I also want the team to come together and determine if everybody is aware of the problem and are communicating. There are some teams that do an excellent job of securing additional support. However, those specialists, medical physicians are not always aware of the course of treatment that other specialists are doing. So it's good to make sure that there is a regular scheduled meeting where the course of treatment is being discussed, progress notes are being discussed, concerns are being shared, and teams are celebrating success. So look and make sure that everybody's aware of the problem and everybody's coming together to discuss the problem. And then you want to have some discussion about who the problem belongs to, and you can consider if it's a motivation problem, a skill problem, or a resource or capacity problem. And so when you consider motivation and you're talking about the person who is actually having the problem, you should have some discussion about, is the person motivated to follow through with treatment? And if they're not, there are contracted behavior providers that is willing to rearrange reinforcement so that we can motivate the person to follow through with treatment recommendations. Or the person can advocate and say that they want to attempt another um, course of treatment. You also want to consider if the caregiver is motivated to follow through with treatment recommendations. And then if both parties are in a place where they are motivated, you want to look at if this is a skill issue. And the team should really assess what has been taught. I always like to use this example. You have to learn addition before you do multiplication. And so assessing where the person is and where teaching needs to begin is going to be critical. And also considering historically who has worked on teaching a skill. Um, I have been in lots of wonderful ISLs where direct care staff have taken on the initiative to teach some potty training skills, and they've done their best, and um, it just was not enough. And so it's great for the team to discuss if a specialist needs to offer the team some support with teaching skills. And then you want to have some discussion about if the resource is enough. And so I'm going to bounce back to behaviors. If you are supporting a person who is having behavioral problems 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, um, it's great that you have an contracted behavior provider in place. However, if they're only coming to the home twice a week for an hour and 30 minutes, that may not be enough initially. So making sure what the supports that you have, making sure it's a sufficient amount of supports. And then also considering if the resources that you have, are they available in the area that the person lives in or is considering to move in. I would not encourage a person to move to Moscow, Missouri, because I'm not aware of any that has behavioral problems. I'm not aware of any contracted behavioral providers out there in that area. So just considering if the service is available. So if you've had all those kind of gone through those questions, had lots of discussion, you want to determine if the problem is a new problem. And so if the problem is a new problem, you can add lots of questions to this, but this is a list of questions that will definitely generate some good dialogue. Have there been any life-changing events? Did that person, the focused person, did their preferred person get a better position in with the agency that's supporting them? Did they recently have a reduction in the number of hours that they were going to a day program that's not related to anything that they could control? You want to look at how often the problem is occurring. Does the problem occur in most environments and with everyone? And also having some discussion around when the problem is not occurring. And if you think about these questions here, you can also think about when you go see your medical physician when you're having a new issue. This is some of the same questions that they will ask you to do some problem solving with you. And then you want to have discussion around if the problem is not new and it's acute, which I consider a serious problem. You want to bring in all of the professionals that are assigned to work with this person as soon as possible. So if you're working with a family that's in their natural home and mom is coordinating care for the person, then you want to have mom to get some input or something written from the primary care physician. If they are working with a behavior analyst, you want to bring them in and have them quickly and thoroughly review the problem. You want to review historical information from previous therapists just to make sure that they did not make notes of things that possibly could be considered for the future. So did they predict that an acute issue may occur, and what did they recommend? And once you've done that, if there is still not a clear path to take, you may need to bring in additional support. So reaching out to the area behavior analyst, or if there are not services in place, consider reaching out to get services. And if the problem is chronic, if it's reoccurring, again, you want to get that historical information. You want to look to see what strategies were effective in the past. I've seen a few ISPs that has this information documented very well. You want to have some discussion around if these strategies are still being implemented. Do any of these strategies need simple changes to them? Is it an issue with people implementing the strategies as written, and ensuring that there is communication around these strategies and the team being aware of modifications and changes associated with the strategies. So I know that's quite a bit of information, but these are all great things to discuss during that initial problem-solving meeting. Also, you want to, when reviewing what's been tried, Directive 4.3 identifies when a crisis safety plan has been developed, so looking to see if there's a crisis safety plan. Also, it's great to have one, but everyone supporting that person should receive some training on that plan. If there is a plan written, you want to look and see when implementation of that plan was started, and if there's data available, look and see what the data says about the safety, the implementation of the safety crisis plan. How many times that modifications were made to the safety crisis plan. And I know a lot of times when people hear safety crisis plan, they are thinking about how to respond when unsafe behaviors occur. But having those proactive procedures, those things you do, the things that the person enjoys doing, having lots of those things are just as important as how you respond when things are not going well. It's also important to look at historical and current therapies. You want to determine if people met their goals that the therapist outlined. Are there any additional skills that the person should learn that the therapist recommended? And also having some good dialogue around are there more opportunities for the person to practice those skills in various environments without supports, or how do we get this person to use these new skills learned by the physical therapist or the behavioral therapist without prompting? And then the team should have some discussion if outside support was um, sought out. So there are a few supports that are available to people who have an open episode of care with the regional office. The Regional Behavior Support Review Committee is one. There are currently 3 committees up and running, one in the Central Region, which is held by Lucas Evans, one in the Western Region, which is held by the Area Behavior Analyst Rita Cooper, and in the Eastern Region, it's held by me, Melantha Witherspoon. One of the forms that you received was a referral form for the Regional Behavior Support Review Committee, so you would just simply email that form out and email it to one of the Area Behavior Analysts. Dee Dee ECHO is recently up and running, and I think they meet twice a month on a Thursday. Don't quote me. You guys have a copy of that referral form, and it has great instructions on who should be contacted. However, the only difference with this form is that the person presenting the case and actually meeting the referral should be a clinician, so it could be the contracted behavioral provider, the person's primary care physician, or their psychiatrist reaching out to this group of peers to get some additional support with complicated cases. And then we also have our agency tier support consultants who would love to work with ISL providers and setting up good systems to promote good service and quality of life for the individuals that they are being supported, that's being supported. And you can also reach out to the area behavior analyst. So some teams are ahead of the game, and they have had the opportunity to reach out to the Regional Behavior Support Review Committee. So in that meeting, you want to do a good job of reviewing those recommendations and having some open and honest discussion around were those recommendations followed, and what prevented, if they were not followed, what were the barriers that prevented the recommendations from being followed. And also, with some very complicated cases, did the team review any literature to see what research said about this complicated issue, whether it's speeding or behavioral, just going back to research and discussing that during the meeting. And so after you have some discussion surrounded around if appropriate supports were sought out, and you have some great dialogue about that, you're going to consider, do the current strategies need to be modified, or do you need new strategies? And so it's good to, when you think about that safety crisis plan, again, having open, honest dialogue, not blaming or pointing fingers at anybody, discussing, did we actually do a good job of making sure mom or the direct care professionals understood all of the elements of this crisis, of this safety crisis plan. When we're looking at the progress notes from the contracted behavior provider, and there's graphs there, did the graphs show slow progress or no progress? Were changes made in a timely manner? And just having some honest conversations around that, because if there was slow progress, then additional modifications can be made. If there was no progress, then the team should consider new strategies. So, again, these are great things to talk about when you're having that problem solving meeting to develop an action plan. And so, again, there are times when you're going to have to develop new strategies. So, going back to the first step of ruling out medical issues. So, in the event that the team is not clear about if this may be medical or behavioral, um, it's always good if you've already seen one specialist. It's not a bad idea to get um, opinions from multiple specialists. Um, if you identify that there are some things that this person, the focus person, could benefit from learning, bring in your specialist so that those skills can be taught or shaped and used in any environment that that person comes in contact with. If you have great supports in place, um, make sure all of those supports are communicating. If you don't have a regular scheduled meeting, bring everyone together and um, outline the course of treatment, what's working, what are some areas that need to be addressed. And then when we are thinking about the person's environment, making sure that the people who are providing day-to-day care are appropriately trained, so they receive competency based training. If you're working with a family that's in a natural home setting, making sure that that parent has the opportunity to have some time away from the supporting the person with their complex needs. If there's not a safety crisis plan, um, bringing all of those team members that was identified earlier in the slides and having them to develop a safety crisis plan, reaching out to the regional behavior support review committee or ECHO, or becoming a tiered support agency. All of those things will benefit the entire team. So you're going to develop new strategies around addressing medical needs, developing skills, and addressing environmental things, internal and external. And then you need to develop a system that is sustainable. It allows data to be collected and analyzed. Decisions are data driven, so modifications are made based on what the data says, and a system that allows the team to have open and honest communication. And then the last step is to ensure that there is a follow-up meeting. And the importance of that follow-up meeting is to make sure, one, that everybody is on the same page, that things are actually getting done, and the strategies that the team identified that need to be put in place, that they're actually effective. And then if they're not, you come up with more solutions to address having better outcomes. This is also a time when service providers can review progress notes. Initially, this meeting will be a little time consuming on the front end. It may result in people walking away with tasks, but we just need to remember that those tasks are likely to improve the quality of life of the person that is being supported. So in summary, I hope that you guys walk away with understanding when a problem-solving meeting needs to occur, and the whole purpose of the problem-solving meeting is to develop a action plan that looks at um, what is the problem, who the problem belongs to, having some discussion around is this a new problem, an acute problem, or a chronic problem, and taking a thorough look at the strategies and determining if they need to be um, modified or if there needs to be new strategies. And then considering the implementation of those strategies as our recommendation as it relates to the focus person or the people supporting the focus person is there are barriers surrounded around skill deficit, motivation, or resource. And then problem solving around those things and making sure there is a system to ensure that change is able to be maintained. Its decisions are based off data, and that people are meeting um, regularly to review if strategies are working. Again, thank you guys for joining me today, and I am welcoming questions now. I have some great questions. I was asked, will service coordinators be offered this training? And this training was recorded and will be posted on the internet. So anyone who wants to access this training can access it. But that was a great question.
I'm going to chime in for just a second on that with Melantha. Um, we do put our recorded webinars on the division website. There is in the carousel on our main landing page, you will find one of those boxes. You can click on any of those boxes, and it'll take you to a particular landing page. But within that, there's a navigation box that says webinars. Um, we also send out email blasts when the recordings become available. So if you're not signed up to receive the division email blast, I suggest you do that. There is a panel in the carousel specifically to sign up for division email blast. Um, this particular webinar may be a little delayed in getting posted on our website. We are updating the department website on the back side of the system, and so we know that we are at least a week without being able to post anything new. So I can tell you that it will be at least a week before the recording will go out, which is also another reason why I made sure that you got the materials for this webinar today rather than having to wait for that email blast.
I have another great question, and that question is there a template for the action plan? At this time, there is not, but I may have some discussion with my counterparts and see what their thoughts are about developing a template. Yes, I have a question about is it appropriate for an agency or service provider to join or participate in the meeting or actually initiate the meeting? I say yes. If whoever identifies what the problem is, if you see the problem happening earlier, yes, an agency can call a meeting, a service provider, the occupational therapist, the behavioral therapist, um, any team member can call a meeting. Please feel free to continue to ask questions. You guys are asking great questions. I'm going to give you guys 2 more minutes for questions. I think people still have questions. Please feel free to ask them. I'm happy to answer them to the best of my ability. So send them, please. If there are roommate issues, I think that is definitely an opportunity for the team to come together and have some discussion around what the problem is, or and if there are solutions to address the problem. So that is a opportunity to have a problem solving meeting. Yes. Okay, Amber, give me. Oh, I, I understand the question. Great question, Amber. You are really excellent. Great questions. So, if Amber asks if you're supporting a person who is having a conflict with their roommate, should both teams come together? And I would say yes. Please bring both teams together. Someone on one of those teams may have information that may lead to a great solution. So we want to make sure that everyone is at the table, and you're going to have expectations that this meeting is going to be a positive meeting, and everyone is going to work together. Please continue with the questions. I'm waiting on them. I'm welcoming them. Something that I did not highlight is I think it's also very important when you have that meeting to document what is being discussed in the meeting, and the new strategies that will be attempted, and any supports that the person, new supports that were identified for the person. Amber, you asked a loaded question. What's the best way to collect data? There are lots of ways to collect data. Um, People are using technology now. So I think what you should consider is what method, what system will make it most likely for the person who is collecting data to do it. So um, if you're an ISL agency and you allow phones in the home, it may be best to collect data through technology. If you're an ISL provider who has a no cell phone policy, other systems may need to be considered. You're asking great questions. Thank you. All right. If I don't have any additional questions, again, thank you for joining me today. I'm going to go ahead and end this webinar.